My name is Zoe Richardson. I am 78 years old. For most of my life, I was a mother before I was anything else. I raised 7 children all by myself. 7 mouths to feed, 7 bodies to clothe, 7 hearts to keep beating when their father walked out the door and never came back. That was 50 years ago. Before I tell you what happened, before I tell you about the day I stopped being invisible, I need you to do something for me. If you are listening right now, please make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video, and turn on the little bell icon so you won't miss the next part of this story. And I want to know where you're listening from. Drop it in the comments whether you're from New York, Texas, California, or a little town nobody's ever heard of. I read those comments, and it means more to me than you'll ever know. Now, let me take you to the day it all began. It was a Thursday morning in mid-November. Cold enough for frost to stick to the grass, but not cold enough to keep the mailman from making his rounds. I was sitting in the small kitchen of my 1-bedroom apartment, a place that smells faintly of instant coffee and lavender, staring at my old flip phone. No calls, no text, no birthday messages. The day before had been my birthday, my 78th, and for the first time since I became a mother, not one of my children called me. Not a single one. Not even a lazy happy birthday on Facebook. It had been coming for years, the slow drifting apart. First came the excuses. Mom, I'm so busy with work. Mom, the kids have soccer practice. Mom, we'll visit next month. Then came the silence. You would think that after raising 7 children, nursing them through fevers, holding them after breakups, fighting tooth and nail to keep a roof over their heads, I'd have earned at least a phone call. But apparently, motherhood expires once you stop being useful. I stared at that little phone for so long the numbers blurred. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife, the phone lit up. For one breathless second I thought it was one of them. I snatched it up, pressed it to my ear. Mrs. Thornton. This is Shady Grove Nursing and Rehab calling. My heart sank. It wasn't family. It was a stranger's voice, flat and businesslike. They were calling about an unpaid bill for my friend Louise's room. Louise had been in that nursing home for 3 years. Her children lived less than an hour away, but they visited maybe twice a year. The rest of the time she was alone, staring out the window. I'd seen what loneliness could do to a person in that place. It made them shrink, not just in body but in spirit. And suddenly I saw my future. Not just saw it, felt it. I could picture myself in that same beige room, the smell of disinfectant in the air, staring at a door that never opened, waiting for children who never came. I made myself a promise right then. I was not going to die forgotten. That afternoon, I decided to call just one of my children. My oldest, Henry. If anyone would pick up, it would be him. The phone rang. Once. 3 times. Then a click. Hello. His voice was rushed, like I'd caught him in the middle of something important. Henry, it's Mom, I said softly. Oh, Mom. Can I call you back? I'm in a meeting. My throat tightened. It won't take long. But I didn't get to finish. Yeah, okay, I'll call you later, he said. And then the line went dead. I sat there with the phone in my hand, the cold November light spilling through the blinds, and felt the weight of every unreturned call, every missed holiday, every empty chair at my kitchen table. And that's when the idea came. An idea so bold, so out of character for me that it scared me. But it also made my pulse race. They had forgotten me. They had erased me from their lives. But what I was about to do, they would never forget. I stood up, walked to my bedroom, and pulled an old wooden box from the closet. It had been years since I'd opened it. Inside was the one thing that could change everything, something I'd been saving for decades without ever knowing why. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. I sat down on the edge of my bed, staring at it, knowing that if I went through with this, nothing would ever be the same. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps outside my apartment door. Low, measured, like someone was trying not to be heard. Froze. No one visits me unannounced. No one has a key. The footsteps stopped. A shadow slid across the crack under my door. And then, the footsteps stopped just outside my door. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, The only sound in my apartment was the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. Then came a single knock. Not loud, not urgent, just deliberate. I didn't move. My apartment isn't the kind of place people drop by. The last time someone knocked on my door without warning, it was the electric company wanting to check my meter. But this knock didn't sound like business. It sounded personal. I slid the wooden box back under the bed, my fingers brushing the dust that had gathered there over the years. Then I shuffled toward the door, every step slow, my ears straining. "Who is it?" called. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. No answer. I swallowed, placed my hand on the doorknob. I hesitated. At 78, you learn to trust hesitation. It saved me more times than I can count. But curiosity has a way of eating at you. I cracked the door open, just enough to see a sliver of the hallway. And there he was. A man in a worn brown coat, collar pulled high, a wool cap shadowing most of his face. He wasn't young, but he wasn't my age either. Somewhere in his 50s, maybe. He looked like the kind of man who could disappear into a crowd without anyone remembering they'd seen him. "Mrs. Thornton." His voice was low, careful. "Yes. I knew your husband." The air seemed to leave the hallway. My husband. I hadn't heard that word in decades. Not in connection to the man who had vanished from my life like smoke when our youngest was still in diapers. I opened the door wider, heart pounding. "Who are you?" He glanced down the hall before stepping closer. "Name's Ray. I promised him I'd find you, someday." I stared at him, every instinct screaming that this was trouble, but also that this was the kind of trouble that might lead to answers. "Why?" I asked. Instead of answering, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, yellowed at the edges, the flap sealed with a thin strip of tape. He held it out to me. "This is from him. Been carrying it a long time." I didn't take it right away. I just stood there, my mind flashing through 50 years of unanswered questions. Where had he gone? Why had he left me with 7 children and no money? Why hadn't he sent a single letter? Finally I reached for it. My fingers brushed the paper. It was warm from his pocket. "I can't stay," Ray said quickly, glancing over his shoulder again. "But you read that, and you'll understand everything. Just be careful. There are people who wouldn't want you to know what's in there." Before I could speak, he was already walking away, his boots thudding softly against the hallway floor. He didn't look back. I closed the door, locked it, and stood with the envelope in my hand. My knees felt weak, like the weight of that paper was pressing me into the floor. Took me hours to open it. I made tea, I washed the same mug twice. I paced the length of the apartment until my legs ached. Finally, just as the sun dipped low and painted the walls gold, I tore the flap open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded in thirds. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was his. Slanted, uneven letters that looked like they'd been written in a hurry. "Clara," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I never made it back. There's something you don't know. Something I did to keep you and the kids safe." I read those words over and over until the letters blurred into black smudges. Safe. The man who had left us with nothing had been protecting us. From what? My eyes jumped ahead to the last line. "When the time comes, go to the farm. The old place near Ash Hollow. The key is still where we left it. Trust no one." The farm. I hadn't thought about that place in years. It was where we'd spent one summer before everything fell apart. A crumbling old property in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. The kind of place with splintered fences, a rusting windmill, and a creek that only ran in the spring. We'd only been there for a few months, but I remembered the key. He'd kept it hidden in a hollowed-out fence post by the gate. But why after all this time? And why send a stranger to hand-deliver the letter? I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my chair by the window, the letter in my lap, the wooden box still under my bed. My mind kept drifting back to the days when the kids were small, back to the life I'd fought tooth and nail to build from nothing. I was 28 the day he left. The morning had started like any other, bacon sizzling in the skillet, coffee percolating on the counter. The kids were running in and out of the kitchen, pulling on mismatched socks, arguing about who got to sit by the window on the bus. He had been sitting at the table, staring into his coffee like it held some secret. I thought he was just tired. I didn't know that by sundown he'd be gone. There wasn't a fight. No slammed doors. Just a note on the counter. Take care of them. Sorry. That was it. No forwarding address. No call. No explanation. I had 7 mouths to feed and not a dime in savings. I worked every job I could find. Cleaning houses, waiting tables, stocking shelves at the grocery store after midnight while the older kids watched the younger ones. I didn't buy new shoes for myself for 14 years. Every penny went to food, rent, and school supplies. And I did it. I kept them clothed, fed, and in school. I sat through every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every scraped knee and broken heart. I was there. Always there. And now, here I was, decades later, holding a letter from the man who'd started it all. A letter that told me to go back to the one place I thought I'd never see again. By morning, my mind was made up. I didn't know what I'd find at that farm, but I knew one thing. My children weren't going to care. They wouldn't notice if I left. I packed a small bag, tucked the letter inside, and reached under the bed for the wooden box. When I opened it this time, the air seemed to shift in the room. Inside, wrapped in a faded dish towel, was the thing I'd saved all these years. The thing I would need if I was going to finish what I'd just started. The bag was small. 1 change of clothes, pair of thick socks, my arthritis pills in an orange bottle with a faded label, a letter, and the wooden box. I had not been more than a few miles from this apartment in over 5 years, but when I zipped that bag shut, it felt like I was locking away the life that had been killing me slowly. Outside, the morning air was sharp and clear, the kind that makes you feel awake down to your bones. The neighborhood was still. Just the sound of a distant lawnmower and the faint buzz of a power line. I pulled my coat tight around me and walked to the bus stop. The bus ride out of town was long and quiet. Rows of tired faces staring out the windows, each of us lost in our own worlds. I sat by the window, watching the streets I'd walked for decades give way to open fields and the skeletal remains of corn stalks swaying in the wind. Every mile felt like peeling back another layer of my life, revealing a woman I'd almost forgotten, one who still had somewhere to be, something to fight for. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It started as a flicker in the corner of my eye. Someone standing on the opposite side of the street when I boarded the bus. I caught the shape of a man in a dark coat, collar turned up, standing too still for too long. When I glanced back, he was gone. Now, hours later, as the bus rattled down a 2-lane highway toward Nebraska, I saw it again. In the side mirror just for a second, a black SUV, far back, keeping pace with us. Coincidence, I told myself. But I kept watching. By the time we reached the small town nearest Ash Hollow, the bus was nearly empty. I stepped off onto the cracked pavement of a station that looked like it hadn't been renovated since 1975. There was a diner across the street, its neon sign flickering, and a single cab idling at the curb. The driver leaned out the window, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Where to, ma'am?" "Ash Hollow. The old farm just past the creek." He gave me a look that lingered a moment too long, like the name meant something to him. Then he stubbed out his cigarette and waved me in. The road to Ash Hollow wound through bare trees and open fields. The cab smelled faintly of stale coffee and gasoline. "Don't get many folks asking for that place," the driver said finally. "It's been in my family a long time," I replied, my voice even. He glanced at me in the rear view. "You know it's been empty for decades, right? Places falling apart. And, well, folks say it's bad luck to stay there." "Bad luck doesn't scare me," I said, though my hands tightened around my bag. We reached the gate just as the sun began to sink, staining the sky orange and pink. The wooden fence was leaning, its posts gray with age. My eyes went straight to the one post near the gate that had a knot halfway up its length. A hiding place. I stepped out of the cab, paid the driver, and waited until the sound of his engine faded down the road. The wind whispered through the dry grass as I walked to the post. My fingers found the knot, pressing into it until it shifted slightly under my touch. With a tug, the small wooden plug came free. Inside was the key. Old, rusted but still whole. The farmhouse was just beyond the gate, its roof sagging, windows dark. The air smelled faintly of earth and something else, something metallic. Inside, dust coated every surface. My footsteps echoed in the empty rooms. The place felt frozen in time, as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. A single chair stood in the middle of the living room. On the floor beside it, a glass jar lay on its side, empty. I set my bag down and walked through the house. Each room stirred memories. The kitchen where I'd once stood shelling peas with the kids, the narrow staircase where we'd hung wet clothes to dry because the dryer didn't work. In the bedroom at the end of the hall I stopped. There, carved faintly into the wooden doorframe, were initials. Mine and his. I reached out to trace them. My hand shook. That's when I heard it. Gravel crunching outside. I turned toward the window. A black SUV sat at the end of the drive, engine running. I ducked away from the glass, heart pounding in my ears. Whoever it was, they hadn't made a move to get out. They were just watching. Waited. 10 minutes. 15. Then slowly the SUV backed up, turned around and disappeared down the road. I stayed frozen by the wall, clutching the wooden box to my chest. If they knew I was here, it was only a matter of time before they came back. And if the letter was right, there was something in this place worth following me for. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. I sat in the corner of the old living room, back against the wall, the wooden box on my lap. The wind hissed through the gaps in the window frame, and every creak of the house made me lift my head, straining to listen. The black SUV hadn't returned, or maybe it had, and I hadn't heard it over the groaning of the roof beams. Either way, I knew I wasn't alone in this story anymore. By sunrise, the farmhouse was cold enough for my breath to show in the air. I lit the old kerosene lamp I found in a cabinet and started moving through the rooms with slow, careful steps. In the kitchen, I ran my fingers along the counters, feeling the fine grit of dust. I opened cupboards, empty. The refrigerator door was ajar, its inside dark and brittle. But in the pantry, behind a row of glass jars filled with cloudy liquid, I found something odd. A scrap of paper taped to the wall, edges curling with age. On it, in my husband's handwriting, were 2 words. Check upstairs. The staircase was narrow, the steps groaning under my weight. The upstairs hallway smelled faintly of cedar and mildew. I opened the first door. Just an empty bedroom with peeling wallpaper. The second, same thing. The third door was locked. I searched my pockets, then my bag, then remembered the wooden box. It wasn't just sentimental, it had weight. Inside, beneath the faded dish towel, lay an old metal key, smaller than the one from the gate. Fit. The room was dark at first, curtains drawn tight. I pulled one open, and the light spilled across the space. It wasn't a bedroom at all, it was a study. A desk sat against the far wall, its surface neat except for a single object, a wooden picture frame turned face down. When I picked it up, the dust smeared against my fingertips. I turned it over and froze. It was a family photo. Me, my husband, and our 7 children. But not the way I remembered us. The kids were dressed in their Sunday best, all smiling stiffly. My husband's arm was around me, but his eyes, they weren't smiling at all. They were watching something, someone out of frame. And behind us, in the blurred background, stood a man in a dark coat. My skin prickled. I set the photo down and began opening drawers. Most were empty, but the bottom left stuck halfway. I tugged harder until it came free, revealing a leather-bound journal. The pages inside were filled with my husband's handwriting, short, frantic notes. Names I didn't recognize, dollar amounts, and over one phrase. They can't know. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before he disappeared. I sat back in the chair, the journal heavy in my hands. The pieces weren't fitting together yet, but I could feel the edges starting to touch. If someone had been watching us even back then. Maybe that was why he left. Maybe that was why my children grew up resenting me, thinking I'd driven him away. Because that's what I let them believe. I was still flipping through the pages when the sound came. Gravel crunching under tires. I moved to the window and peeked through the curtain. The black SUV was back. This time it rolled slowly up the driveway and stopped just outside the gate. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Same dark coat. Same stillness. He didn't move toward the house. Just stood there looking up at it like he knew exactly where I was. And then he raised his hand. Not to wave. Not to threaten. Just to point straight at me. He didn't wave. He didn't shout. He just pointed at me through the window, then dropped his hand and started walking. Not toward the gate. Toward the house. My breath came fast and shallow. I backed away from the window, clutching the journal to my chest. My first thought was to run upstairs, but I knew better. I've seen enough people trapped in bad situations to know you never run toward a corner. The porch boards groaned under his weight. I grabbed the wooden box and moved toward the back door. But before I could reach it, the front door rattled. Then a sharp, splintering crack would giving way. He was inside. I ducked behind the old kitchen counter, my mind racing. The sound of his boots moved across the living room floor. Slow, steady, deliberate. Like he wanted me to know he had all the time in the world. "Mrs. Thornton," he called softly. His voice was calm, almost polite. "You shouldn't have come here." I didn't answer. People are watching this place. People who don't want you digging into the past. His footsteps came closer. "If you care about your children, you'll turn around, get back on that bus, and forget you ever found that letter." The mention of my children made something hot flare in my chest. "You know my children?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "I know more than you think. And I know why they won't have anything to do with you." That cut deep. But I swallowed it down. "Then you know I'm not leaving without answers." He came into view then, rounding the counter. Up close, I could see the lines etched into his face, the gray threading through his beard. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "What's in this house isn't meant for you," he said. "It's dangerous. It was meant to be buried." "Buried things don't stay buried forever," I said quietly. For a moment, he just studied me, as if deciding whether I was worth the effort of convincing. Then his gaze dropped to the wooden box in my hands. "You found it," he said, and there was something like recognition in his voice. "Then it's already too late." Before I could ask what he meant, he reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the counter between us. Photograph. It was old, edges curling, but the image was clear. My husband standing with two men I'd never seen before. One of them was the same man who'd just broken into this house. "Ask yourself," he said, "why a man would walk away from his family with nothing but the clothes on his back, and a secret worth killing for." Before I could answer, a noise outside made both of us turn. A car engine growing louder fast. The man's face changed. Whatever control he had slipped for just a second, replaced by something sharper. Fear. "They found us," he muttered. In two long strides, he was at the front door. He looked back once, his voice low but urgent. "If you want to live long enough to hear the truth, don't open that box until you're ready to lose everything." And then he was gone, disappearing into the trees behind the house just as the sound of tires crunching gravel filled the air again. I stood there, the photograph in one hand, the wooden box in the other, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Outside, the new vehicle came to a stop. A door slammed. And this time, I heard more than one pair of footsteps. It was spring, the day my children stopped looking at me the same. I'd cooked a big Sunday dinner. Ham, potatoes, fresh biscuits. I wanted to keep us together, to remind them that no matter what had happened, we were still a family. They were teenagers then, restless, full of questions I couldn't answer. And that night, the oldest, Henry, pushed his plate away. "Why did Dad really leave?" he asked. The room went still. Forks hovered in mid-air. I told them the same thing I'd told them since the day he walked out, that he'd decided he didn't want the responsibility, that it was his choice, not mine. That was true, but not the whole truth. Henry stared at me for a long time. Then he said, "I think you're lying." The others didn't say it out loud, but I saw it in their eyes. A seed had been planted. And over the years, it grew into something I couldn't kill. Now, decades later, standing in the cold, dusty farmhouse, I heard those same voices. Older now, sharper, coming toward the door. The footsteps outside were heavier than Ray's had been. The boards on the porch groaned louder under their weight. Then came a knock. Not tentative this time, firm, almost demanding. "Mom!" Froze. I would have known that voice anywhere. It was Henry. I opened the door slowly. He stood there, taller and grayer than I remembered. His jaw set hard. Beside him was my second oldest, Ruth. Her arms crossed tight against her chest. Behind them, a dark sedan idled in the driveway. "What are you doing here?" Henry asked, no warmth in his voice. "I could ask you the same," I said. Ruth stepped forward. "We know about the letter. We know you came here to dig up whatever Dad left behind. And we're telling you right now, leave it alone." Their eyes were not the eyes of children coming to check on their mother. They were the eyes of people guarding something. "How do you even know I'm here?" asked slowly. Henry glanced over his shoulder at the car. "Because you were followed. And if you don't get back in that car with us, you're going to regret staying." I searched their faces, trying to read the truth between the lines. But what I saw there wasn't fear for me. It was fear of what I might find. "Tell me what you're hiding," I said. Neither of them spoke. Ruth just shook her head. "Don't open that box, Mom. If you care about what's left of this family, you'll burn it before the wrong people see what's inside." Before I could answer, the sound of another engine cut through the air, the low, rumbling growl of a truck pulling up fast. Henry's head snapped toward the road. "We're out of time," he muttered. The truck skidded to a stop at the gate. 3 men got out. None of them looked like they were here for a friendly chat. Henry stepped between me and the doorway. "Stay inside. Don't say a word." But I wasn't about to let my children fight battles I didn't understand, not without knowing why they'd been keeping me in the dark for half a lifetime. As the men started up the drive, one of them carrying something long and wrapped in cloth, I tightened my grip on the wooden box. If this was what my husband had been running from, I was already in too deep to walk away. The air outside the farmhouse had turned heavy, like the moments before a storm. The 3 men from the truck didn't speak. They just kept walking toward us, boots crunching over the gravel, eyes locked on the box in my hands. Henry stepped forward, his palm raised. "She doesn't know anything," he called out. "You've got no reason to be here." One of the men, tall, broad, wearing a brown leather jacket, smirked. "That's where you're wrong. She's got everything we've been looking for." Ruth's hand tightened around my arm. "Mom, give them the box." I shook my head. "Not until someone tells me what's in it." The man in the leather jacket stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Lady, you open that lid, and you won't live long enough to regret it." Henry shifted his stance, blocking the steps. "You're not taking it." And then it happened fast. One of the other men reached into his coat, and Henry lunged forward. They slammed into the porch railing, wood splintering under their weight. Ruth screamed. The leather-jacketed man shoved past me into the house, his boots tracking mud across the worn floorboards. I spun, clutching the box to my chest. "Get out of my house." He ignored me, moving straight toward the kitchen. He started pulling open drawers, looking under the table, like he was searching for something else. That's when I realized. He wasn't just after the box. From outside came a sharp, metallic click, the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. My heart leapt into my throat. Henry's voice was low, urgent. "Mom, run." But before I could, the man in the kitchen yanked the box from my arms. The weight of it left me cold, like he'd just stolen more than wood and metal. I grabbed at it, but he shoved me hard. My shoulder slammed into the wall. The box tumbled to the floor, the lid popping open. For a moment everything froze. Inside, wrapped in a piece of yellowed cloth, was a photograph. A photograph of my husband, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. Both of them smiling. And behind them, a door with a symbol painted on it. The man in the leather jacket snatched up the photo, his face darkening. You shouldn't have seen this. Outside, the fight on the porch had turned into a brawl. Henry and the other man crashed into the gravel, fists flying. Ruth yanked me toward the back door. Come on, Mom, we have to get you out of here. But I couldn't take my eyes off that symbol. Something about it twisted in my memory like I'd seen it before, in a place I was never supposed to be. The man slipped the photograph into his jacket and headed for the door, barking to the others. We've got what we came for. The truck's engine roared back to life. Gravel sprayed as they tore down the road, leaving us in silence broken only by Henry's ragged breathing. I turned to him. Who was that man with your father in the photo? Henry's jaw clenched. You don't want to know. But I did. And now I would find out. Because I was starting to think my husband's disappearance wasn't about abandonment at all. It was about something dangerous enough to follow me for 40 years. That night, sleep was a stranger. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photograph. My husband's arm draped casually around the stranger's shoulders, both of them grinning in front of a door marked with that strange symbol. It wasn't just a picture. It was a riddle. And I'd never been able to walk away from a riddle. At sunrise, I made coffee, wrapped my shawl around my shoulders, and stared out the window at the empty road where the truck had vanished hours before. Henry was on the couch, snoring softly, a bruise blooming along his cheekbone. Ruth had gone home in the night without a word. I waited until Henry stirred, then said, I need to know what that symbol means. His eyes flicked toward me, wary. Leave it alone, Mom. That photo was nothing but trouble. Trouble's already here, I said. I just want to know why. When he refused to talk, I did what I've always done, found my own way. There's a dusty little library in the heart of Grey Hollow, the kind with floorboards that complain under your feet and a librarian who knows everyone's business. Her name's Beverly, and she's been there longer than some of the books. Clara May Whitlock, she said when I walked in. Haven't seen you in here since your youngest was in pigtails. I smiled politely. I'm looking for something unusual. A symbol. I sketched it on a scrap of paper. The circle, the jagged slash through the center, the small mark like an eye above it. Her face changed. What is it? I asked. She hesitated. Where'd you see this? In a photograph, I said carefully. An old one. Beverly lowered her voice. That's the mark of the Hollows Gate Society. Been gone for decades. Folks said they were just a bunch of businessmen meeting in secret. But, she glanced toward the shelves as if the walls could hear. There were rumors. Deals made in backrooms. Land stolen. People who crossed them just disappeared. I felt a chill ripple through me. Your husband ever do business with the Hollows Gate? She asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe no. Instead, I remembered the way he'd come home late some nights, smelling of cigar smoke and whiskey. His eyes shadowed in a way I couldn't reach. Beverly disappeared into the archives and returned with an old newspaper clipping. It was dated 1979. On the front page was the same symbol, burned into the side of a barn. The headline read, Mysterious Fire Destroys Local Farm. Owner Missing. I stared at the grainy black and white photograph. The missing man's name was Richard Calloway. I didn't know him. But in the article's last paragraph was a single line that made my heart pound. Calloway was last seen in the company of local hardware store owner, Samuel Whitlock. My husband. The world tilted under me. I looked at Beverly. Do you know what happened to Calloway? She shook her head slowly. No one ever saw him again. When I left the library, the air outside felt colder, heavier. The truth wasn't just close, it was breathing down my neck. I climbed into my car, clutching the clipping like it might vanish. And that's when I saw him, leaning against a black sedan parked across the street, arms folded, eyes locked on me. It was the man from the photograph. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. Then he mouthed two words I couldn't mistake. "Stop digging." His eyes never left mine. That cold smile was an answer to a question I hadn't even asked yet. How far would they go to protect their secrets? I didn't wave. I didn't nod. I just got in my car and drove. But the black sedan slid into the road behind me like a shadow that refused to be shaken. Every turn I made, he followed. When I sped up, he matched me. When I slowed, so did he. I didn't head home. Instead, I turned toward Miller's Crossing, a forgotten stretch of road where cell service went to die. I needed to know if this man was just watching or hunting. 2 miles in, he finally pulled alongside. His passenger window rolled down. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Some things in the past need to stay there." I gripped the steering wheel. "Richard Calloway didn't just disappear, did he?" He chuckled. "You're asking the wrong questions." And then, just as quickly, he sped ahead, his tail lights vanishing into the fog. I drove home with my pulse still thundering. But something had shifted. I wasn't just looking for answers anymore. I was looking for the truth they were trying so hard to bury. That night, I dug through my husband's old lockbox in the attic. Under faded receipts and fishing licenses, I found it. A key. Not to our house. Not to his store. A small brass key with HGS, engraved on the side. Hollow's Gate Society. It took 2 days to figure out where the key belonged. I pretended to be buying birdseed from the feed store and mentioned the society. The old man behind the counter went still, then mumbled something about a meeting lodge deep in the Ashwood forest. That night, with the key in my pocket, I drove out there. The lodge was a squat, weathered building, its windows boarded, a heavy iron lock on the door. My hand shook as I slid the key in. It turned smoothly, like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air smelled of mold and secrets. The walls were lined with framed photographs. Men in suits, toasting with glasses of whiskey. In each one, that cursed symbol hung on the wall behind them. And then I saw it. A photograph of my husband shaking hands with a man I now knew was Richard Calloway. Both smiling. Both holding a folder between them. The next photo, Calloway was gone. My husband stood alone. Footsteps creaked behind me. "You shouldn't be here," a voice said. It was Beverly, the librarian. "How did you?" he began. "I followed you," she said, stepping into the dim light. "You're stirring up ghosts that will eat you alive if you're not careful. Did you know my husband was part of this?" Her jaw tightened. Everyone in this town knew. But we didn't talk about it because people who talked ended up like Calloway. "Dead?" Yes. She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a map, Ashwood Forest, with a red X marked deep inside. "That's where they buried the records," she whispered. "If you want proof of what happened, that's where you'll find it. But once you see them, there's no going back." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because sometimes the past isn't dead, and you deserve to hear what really happened when the gates